Welcome, welcome everybody. Today we are back again with Sir Keelan of Formscapes, a highly based YouTube channel, which I highly recommend. Um,
That should be my tagline in like the channel description, just highly based.
I love it. I love it. That's my favorite phrase. All right. Today, uh, we are in a bit of a time crunch, but not particularly. It's just, I would like to keep it moving along, not too much ramblerino. So I think let's jump right into the topics. Firstly, one thing, Q and I are hopefully planning to do a little bit of something of an astrology series where we look at um, transits and stuff, and through the Formscapes lens, i.e., the astrochromogram, and associated topics. And yeah, we're gonna save that for next time to get started on that, just so that we were hoping to get started on it today, but figured a little bit more prep work would be in accordance. But nonetheless, I was hoping to just quickly show you some things, if you'd be so interested. Uh, which is, um, yeah, just I suppose quickly, just this is where we're at right now. We just had a full moon. And now tonight is the Sun opposite Mars retrograde, kind of a tense aspect. And then we have the Sun moves into Aquarius, conjuncts Pluto. And then Mercury does the same after opposing Mars retrograde. And then Neptune conjunct the North Node. And
So we're gonna end up, I believe. So we're gonna end up with this like spread of planets across Pisces and
Pisces, yeah.
Aquarius,
Yeah,
right? So that's interesting.
for
There's a lot
sure.
going on right now for sure, and I haven't really been keeping up with the celestial spheres
Mhm.
and how they're pertaining to all this, but just in terms of current events, like this feels pivotal, very pivotal for a number of reasons. Obviously, the election was just finalized, with the Biden administration rolling over to Trump at the exact same time. Jimmy Carter dies. Biden makes his final move in office, the declaration of the eagle as the official
Mhm.
chordate of the United States,
Mhm.
the official deuterostome of the
Yeah,
United
those.
States, which
Yeah,
that's
some.
actually very significant, I think, because of the symbolism of that. On top of that, LA is on fire. It turns out that Maynard James Keenan was wrong. It is not sinking into the ocean. So I require you guys to now go back and rewrite that entire song Anima and just rework the lyrics. It'll be fine. Anyway, so there's that. And the telepathy tapes. The telepathy tapes are blowing up right now, and it's a good thing that they came on my radar exactly when they did, because it turns out that the research being done with that is very closely related to what I've been doing with my new ever-present origin series. So that's really fascinating. So and then on top of all that, we are in the middle of the Pluto return of the United States, which is, by my calculations, the fourth Pluto return of the modern age itself. If we
Mhm.
start in the 11th century AD with the schism and the Crusades and all that, and work our way forward by those 248-ish year Pluto
Mhm.
Aquarius cycles. We are in the fourth big turning, and then we're also in the fourth slightly smaller turning, as Neil Howe would put it, right? With
Mhm.
these 84-ish year Uranus cycles of the United States, and
Mhm.
we are about to be in the fourth Uranus return of the United States, starting, I believe, actually, I forget which month it is. I want to say it's July of this summer is when, and I could be completely wrong about that,
Yeah, I
but
don't
it's some
recall exactly either. Yeah. Yeah.
Uranus is coming back into Gemini, and the last time it was there was World War II, which is really appropriate, I think, because I think, just if we were to summarize what's going on right now in big picture terms, I would say that the paradigm, the world order of the post-war period, neoliberalism, or whatever you want to call it, is done. It's over. Something else is about to happen, because that is just like the nails are in the coffin, and dirt is being shoveled onto the casket. So that's where we're at, and I imagine that things are going to absolutely pop off the chain sometime this summer or this coming fall, one of the two, because of that Pluto slash Uranus shenanigan business we got going on. So we'll see. Hopefully it won't be World War III, but if the other Uranus returns of the United States are any indication, it's probably going to be World War III. So buckle up, guys.
Yes, indeed. That's well said. And yeah, lots of interesting stuff that we could pull in there. One thing, briefly, the telepathy tapes, that was one thing I was hoping to bring up a little bit.
Within the 2024 podcast documentary series, The Telepathy Tapes, the Johns Hopkins and Harvard neuropsychiatrist Diane Powell and filmmaker Kai Dickens document their investigations into the relationship between nonverbal autism and parapsychological capabilities. What these investigators have uncovered is absolutely breathtaking, and if you have yet to experience the telepathy tapes for yourself, I will say only this: whatever else you have going on in your life can wait. Within modern psychology and medical science, nonverbal autism is regarded as simply a disease. Such individuals are considered to be the unfortunate victims of some poorly understood genetic defect, which renders them unable to be fully formed and, emphasis on the scare quotes, functional human beings. What Dickens and Powell have revealed, however, are not incomplete human beings who are suffering from inexplicable factory defects, but rather an incredible world of capabilities which we might otherwise regard as fantastical or impossible.
And but just in keeping with
this spread of planets across Pisces,
that does seem like a very kind of Piscean type of thing, like this very kind of between worlds, spiritual faculties type of musings, which would kind of fit in that sense. But really the main reason I bring it up, if you'd be so interested, is because I was kind of curious to hear if you, or even just to put the prompt kind of in the door with regard to the nodes, the north node and the south node, because I haven't really heard you say. I'm not sure if you've said things about this before, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, or else maybe next time, like if you would prefer more time to think about it, because that's definitely a big thing with we just had the nodes move into new sign, which I believe they stay in for like a couple of years or so. I don't remember exactly. Maybe about a year. I don't quite remember, but yeah, we just had them move back from Aries, Libra into Pisces, Virgo, and it's conjunct Neptune there, and Saturn will be coming across that, and they'll be wobbling over each other a bunch. And that's yeah, that's kind of one thing I would be curious to hear your thoughts on. I'm not sure if you've thought about that at all.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Yeah, Pisces Virgo. That's interesting because I am a Virgo and my girlfriend is Pisces, so that's interesting in itself. But anyway, as far as the nodes go, yeah, I mean, I guess my take on that is pretty much what you'd expect. I think that generally the karmic interpretation of the nodes is correct. The north node is futurity, it is the destiny of a given incarnation. The south node represents that which is being inherited from the past in whatever way.
Hmm.
And with the symbolism of Rahu and Ketu, so Rahu's the north node, Ketu's the south node. So future and past within Indic cosmology, that would be the head of the serpent and the tail of the serpent, and that lines up nicely with all the rest of the whole symbolic order of
Yeah.
our world, because the serpent is the ego, it is the person, the soul, which is traveling up the chakras in the process of kundalini to achieve
Hmm.
enlightenment or whatever you want to call that. And
Hmm.
so yeah, now I will say this though, in the astrochromogram, I usually leave the light and darkness, like the white and black
Yeah.
tiles, empty there. But um, I think there are a number of different things you can do with that. You can put the north node as the white one and the south node as the black one. I think that works perfectly. There's some other things I've toyed around with too that I think kind of work. You could
Yeah.
put Ceres at the top and Chiron at the bottom. I also think that seems to work pretty well
Hmm.
if you want to play around with the asteroids. But um, either way,
Yeah.
yeah, the nodes are definitely important. It's interesting that they're moving into a different alignment currently.
Yeah. Heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing with the astrochromium that really strikes me is like there's probably something to that, especially because the nodes have to do with the eclipses. Like there are eclipses when there's a full moon or a new moon near the nodes, basically.
Mhm.
And how in the astrochronogram have you have the light and darkness, primordial light and abyssal darkness, perhaps is a way to say it. Um, at a T-square basically with the sun and moon, so it would be kind of like a harmony between the sun and the moon, which is eclipses. Pretty
Yep.
cool. That would make
Mhm.
sense. All right, interesting. Awesome. Yeah, cool. And then more thought about that to come perhaps in the future. Another thing, um, keeping it moving here, I wanted to show you this, dude. This kind of blew my mind when I first saw it. Um, because I'm not sure if you noticed, but I recently changed the colors on my chart to correspond with the astrochronogram. And I was looking at this with Sherry, how we have this is kind of the big Pisces lineup we were just referring to with the North
Right.
Node here. And then you have Venus and Mercury retrograding, wobbling over this a bit and coming back.
Oh, they're retrograding in
Yeah,
Aries,
they
and
both
then
come
here.
back over this. Yeah.
And then they just do this little dance.
Yeah, it really is like a lot going on there. And um,
Yeah.
One of the principles of Trinitarian theology that describes the interrelations of the Trinity is perichoresis, which literally means circle dance.
wow. And then I was reminded while talking with Sherry about this. I was like, yeah, there's kind of a similar thing next year. So I went to record a little thing for next year. I'll be sure to blur out our conversation there. And check this out, dude. This is pretty wild in my opinion. So this is the beginning of 2026, and look at this. This is the colors in order here. I mean, maybe I'm kind of one one could think it's arbitrary, but honestly, I kind of don't think it's arbitrary. And so you have this lineup, and then they all switch here, and you get the same lineup in Aquarius, the little rainbow spectrum here.
Oh my god, it's full on double rainbow all the way across the sky.
And
Mm.
they're all in Aquarius. And
Oh,
then
that's yeah. They're literally lined up just
yeah,
like in the chromogram. Yeah, I mean, you're You're missing Neptune and Uranus, but I mean it goes like counterclockwise just like that. So that's
Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
wild.
dude. I put a little I put in the recording with Sherry. I put the color spectrum here, and it just looks so nice. Like it fits so well.
God, it's a double complete rainbow.
And then they go out a bit, and then we have Saturn into Aries, and then Saturn conjunct Neptune right there. So it's like, I don't know, dude. I mean, I don't know. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's starting to even look like a triple rainbow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what, maybe I feel like there's some esoteric significance because it's interesting that you have Pluto is kind of the point which they all rotate around. Like on here we have Pluto as the kind of the axis on which they turn in a way. I don't know. Just kind of some food for thought, maybe for future speculations and such. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, Pluto, Pluto's kind of like the game in town right now, and will be for a while, for the next like 20 years probably. Pluto, because we're the Pluto being an Aquarius. Every time that's happened historically since like the high Middle Ages, we've had these absolutely radical transformations that have occurred, and they've usually pertained to, well, a huge range of things really, but technology has been a very major one, and religion. Those are really the primary two, but I mean there's all kind. I mean, if you look at the late 18th century, I mean everything we associate with modernity came about during that time period. Really, the birth of electrical technology, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, the French Revolution, the American Revolution. So capitalism, what would eventually become our electrical grids. Liberal democracy, the very idea of a left versus right political divide, Kant's critique of pure reason, all the German idealist guys, Goethe, Hegel, Schelling, those guys were getting started at that point in time, or where they were at the very least alive at the time and would get started in their careers shortly after that at the beginning of the 19th century. So, yeah, it's like, look around. It's not clear exactly what the big world historical things are going to be right now, because we won't really be able to tell until we're looking back on this with hindsight, but things of that magnitude are happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the easy one, the low-hanging fruit to point to is artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Or aliens.
Or aliens, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I don't feel like those are really as big of a deal as we're making it out to be. I mean, artificial intelligence has the potential to be something extremely dangerous. I've said that artificial intelligence, that's going to be the psychical organs of Ahriman, effectively. And so, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big deal, but that's not really what I think is most interesting that's happening right now. Nor is the alien thing. I mean, it's interesting, but there are more subtle things happening right now that I think are going to end up being far more important in the way that we think and the way that our culture operates. I think the downfall of scientism, which is occurring right now, is definitely a huge deal. The telepathy tapes are part of that. That was, of course, foreshadowed by all the shenanigans that went on with COVID. And then you had the James Webb Space Telescope, and it's like, well, hey, would you look at that? All of our astrophysics doesn't work. That's odd. It's becoming more and more clear that the high priests of post-war neoliberalism, aka the scientists, are kind of full of shit in a lot of ways. They like to present things as fact, which are actually extremely speculative. There's this aura that they have accumulated about themselves of serious, objective, solemn pursuit of truth, that they're the ones who are not morally compromised because something peer review, but oh, would you look at that, it turns out that the whole peer review system is also corrupt as fuck. So that's part of it. That's one thing that's going on here. But again, I'm looking for more subtle things. I'm looking for, like, where is our equivalent of Kant's critique of pure reason? Like, where's something like that that's happening right now?
Yeah, you know, I really want to double click on the telepathy tapes. That's kind of one of the things I was hoping to bring up here. But also, I also kind of want to be a little bit contrarian in the sense where I think it also could be something larger than, less subtle and more almost obtuse. Insofar as I'm thinking about also genetic editing and also solar activity. And I mean, I don't, you know, I realize it's a fine line when it comes to talking about like cataclysms and stuff, but I seriously believe that there is, like, at least insofar as my limited research and stuff and intuitions can tell me, that, like, you know, like, for example, I just posted a video today of Gigi Young talking about her over the winter break, she was having intuitions of something that would wipe out the grid system. Interestingly, a few days later, we have the crazy fires, as I'm pretty sure that was how the timing went. And she was literally talking about they're going to destroy the grids so that they can rebuild smart cities. And then you get that. But which totally makes sense, in my opinion.
So I don't have the how. What happens with me is I get visions and I share those. I also think it could be described as a solar flare, right? It's something that's going to take out the grid system as we know it. And then that goes on to the public and the people who can do something to listen to or to not. And so that's now on the individuals who have the power and the control. The responsibility is on them to figure out how to do this properly. I think that we can safely say that when you really peel back all the layers of the societal onion, you're definitely going to have secret societies back there or different occult groups. You're going to have secret orders. You know, I mean, this is the thing that people don't want to admit, but it's the reality. In my mind, the White House is really the White Lodge. Even the concept of America.
You know, like, I'm not claiming that the fires were all staged or anything, but I mean, you know, it's like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, like a coronal mass ejection event, something like that.
Yeah, that's the other thing she said. It would either be like an EMP thing. She just kind of had vision of, like, the grids being wiped out. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like, I don't know, you know, it doesn't have to be the whole crust of the earth turning over like some people suggest.
Every catastrophist throughout history included the earth tilting, turning over, and creating massive tsunamis as the oceans slosh around. Einstein and several others agreed that it would be the unlocking of the crust from the mantle that would cause the shift, but they couldn't figure out how. How do you unlock the crust? With modern evidence, we now know that the crust is locked with a thermoelectric equilibrium, and scientists already know the sun's impacts induce electric current into the mantle, right through that crust-mantle boundary. The solar micronova surges enough of that current to disrupt the thermal and electrical aspects of that thermoelectric equilibrium, unlocking the crust. So, the micronova is also needed to finally finish the stories of the catastrophist claims that the Earth tilts, turns, and triggers massive tsunamis. Interestingly, several scientists in Einstein's time also did the math on what would happen if they could unlock the crust. The ice weight at the polar region would want to spin at the equator. the point of greatest centrifugal force, and the greatest bulk of ice, happens to want to tilt Earth such that Greenland would end up at the equator, and so would the portion of Antarctica that is south of Australia. This would put the Bay of Bengal in the Indian Ocean, and Peru at the north and south poles, which is exactly what was predicted long ago by several other catastrophists who didn't have that ice math from Einstein's time, which is absolutely amazing. But it's not just a two-way coincidence there. The magnetic poles are already moving, as we mentioned, and they are set to meet one another, to collide in the Bay of Bengal, with Peru, of course, being on the opposite side of the planet. If the planet tilts as previously predicted, and as the later math would suggest it will just so happen to put the magnetic poles back at the north and south geographic pole. That's perhaps the greatest coincidence of them all, and yet, just another on our list. The story grows even more interesting when we realize that religious texts and mythological stories say exactly this will happen.
One of the most profound mysteries within human prehistory is the question of why human beings ever came to develop agriculture, and by extension, sedentary civilization at all. Being able to grow domesticated crops might seem like an obvious advantage to us in the modern world, but we must bear in mind that agriculture must have begun in a time in which there were no domesticated plants. The wild precursors of modern crops, such as wheat, barley, and corn, were of far less nutritional value than the sustenance which human beings would have attained from a nomadic mode of life. In order for agriculture to ever come to rival the caloric and nutritional value of nomadic hunting, human beings would have needed to commit themselves to agricultural practices for dozens of generations, during which time they would have been much worse off than would have been the case had they simply remained nomadic hunters. When we look to the skeletal remains of human beings who lived before and after the Neolithic Revolution, what we find is that post-agricultural human beings were in fact far less healthy than their nomadic precursors. Our bone density decreased, our teeth became much more susceptible to decay, our average life expectancy decreased by about 7 years, and we shrank in average height by about 6 inches. All of these observations point to severely decreased overall health and nutrition. What this all indicates is that the so-called invention of agriculture was not in fact a brilliant and novel ingenuity, which uplifted human beings from a state of primal savagery. Rather, it was quite clearly an act of desperation, one which must have been brought on by a cataclysmic break in the stability which had previously allowed for the continuity of pre-civic human life. The exact causes and nature of this cataclysm remain mysterious, but we see its echoes within the numerous deluge myths throughout all human culture forms spread across every continent on our planet.
Like some people suggest, like where it could just be, a particularly large solar flare, which is totally within reason, and it's not speculatively far out, particularly to say that something like this could happen. At least according to scientism and such. Like, they get a lot of things wrong, but I mean,
that's the next thing I was going to kind of mention here is, really, we have no idea what the inside of the Earth is like. We don't have a damn clue. We have no idea how the sun really operates. Like, a particularly large solar flare, we know that's something that could happen because that is something that we know the sun does.
The top story today is one on the Carrington Event super flare of 1859. It was the last super flare produced by the sun, and if it happened today, our way of life would be over. These are expected every 150 to 200 years on the sun. This one happened 164 years ago. The new estimates put it at about an X80 in terms of flare power, with a possible range of X46 to X126. Their best estimate and their top estimate make it 2 to 3 times bigger than the largest flare we've ever seen with satellites.
The lights were so bright that citizens assumed it must be a fire, and the paper reports that the city fire bells were rung. But when the truth revealed itself, the paper writes, it appeared that old nature had only lit up its own chandelier. The lights that were so bright were the aurora borealis, although you can hardly fault people living in the southern United States for not recognizing the northern lights.
In the Carrington event, it is thought that this energized and pushed down all the way to the lowest level L-shell magnetic field.
ScienceAlert.com explains that the fast-moving charges create an intense magnetic field of their own, inducing another set of electrical currents on the ground far below. Under strong solar activity, those currents can be strong enough to overpower whole electrical grids and destroy sensitive electronics. In the case of the 1859 event, this meant damage to the internet highway of the period, the world's telegraph lines. The Mineral Point, Wisconsin Weekly Tribune wrote, "The electricity which attended this beautiful phenomenon took possession of the magnetic wires throughout the country. There were numerous side displays in the telegraph offices, where all sorts of fantastical and unreadable messages came through the instruments, and where the atmospheric fireworks assumed shape and substance in brilliant sparks." The Isle of Wight Observer quoted the superintendent of the Canadian Telegraph Company's lines. "I never, in my experience in 15 years working on telegraph lines, witnessed anything like the extraordinary effect of the aurora borealis between Quebec and the farthest point last night. So complete were the wires under the influence of the aurora borealis that it was found utterly impossible to communicate between the telegraph stations, and the line was closed for the night." History.com writes that night, telegraph communications around the world began to fail. There were reports of sparks showering from telegraph machines, shocking operators and setting papers ablaze.
We know it's only a matter of time before another one erupts. We are in the red zone time window for it right now and in the next 20 to 30 years, not to mention the bigger flare possibilities up to X1000 flare events. When it happens, every grid will catastrophically fail. There will be no power, no internet, no phones, no gas, no banks, nothing. Will be reset back to the basics.
That is something that we know the sun does. A gigantic coronal mass ejection event, maybe that's possible. Maybe our models just make us think that's possible when it's not really all that likely. But on the other hand,
this is definitely a scary scenario for those who believe in electric geology or some of the other burned features that are here on this planet.
There could be all kinds of things that would be completely far out and off the wall that could just happen one day.
The Younger Dryas really ticks all the boxes as a worldwide disaster, which definitely involved sea level rise, both at the beginning and at the end of the Younger Dryas. It definitely involved the swallowing up of lands that previously had been above water. And I think it's an excellent candidate for this worldwide tradition of a global cataclysm, of which one of, but not the only, distinguishing characteristics was a flood, an enormous flood, and the submergence of lands that had previously been above water, underwater. This story is found all around the world. We know there was a nasty epoch, the Younger Dryas, when flooding did occur and when the Earth was subjected to events cataclysmic enough to extinguish entirely the megafauna of the Ice Age.
So what happened during this period that resulted in such rapid environmental change?
They are collectively puzzled by the sudden onset of the Younger Dryas and by the fact that it is accompanied 12,800 years ago by a distinct layer in the earth. It's about the width of a human hand, this distinct dark layer that runs through the earth, and it contains evidence of wildfires. There's a lot of soot in it. There are also nanodiamonds in it, carbon microspherules. There is quartz that's been melted at temperatures in excess of 2,200 degrees centigrade. All of these are proxies for...
Who knows? I mean, if we are taking seriously this more kind of Steinerian view of our solar system, which I think we should, that the celestial bodies are themselves organisms, that they are in fact living almost biological bodies, then they could interact in ways that are just completely outside of the bounds of what modern science would consider. So that's worth keeping in mind, because it means that there could be things that happen that we just cannot foresee, really.
some kind of cosmic impact. It's not a lunatic fringe theory. It's the work of more than 60 major scientists working across many different disciplines, including archaeology and including oceanography as well. And the main theory that's been put forward up to now, and I don't dispute that theory at all, is that the sudden freeze was caused by the cutting off of the Gulf Stream, basically, which is part of the central heating system of our planet. So no wonder it became cold. But what's not really been addressed before is why that happened, why the Gulf Stream was cut, why a sudden pulse of meltwater went into the world ocean, and it was so much of it, and it was so cold that it actually stopped the Gulf Stream in its tracks. And that's where the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis offers a very elegant and very satisfactory solution to the problem. He thinks it was caused by some kind of massive solar outburst. So what everybody's agreed on is the Younger Dryas was bad, but there is dispute about what caused it.
And I personally think it's kind of like symbolically fitting as well. Like it's with the idea that the solar principle is not just like a principle of, it's not like the Venusian light of everything being nice and good. It can also have like a kind of redemptive, very like, imposing type of, even destructive at times, like, and like if you stare at the sun, it's going to hurt your eyes. It's like if you go and lie on the beach for 18 hours in summer, you're going to get sunburned, and it's like, I think these principles kind of scale up in terms of like maybe even cosmological events. I also think it kind of fits with the Book of Revelation, perhaps. But yeah, this is just kind of, honestly, this is just kind of another thought.
I personally have found the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis to be the most persuasive, which most effectively explains all the evidence. A great deal of evidence which suggests that the culprit was what we now call the torrid meteor stream, which the Earth still passes through twice a year. It's now about 30 million kilometers wide. It takes the Earth a couple of days to pass through it on its orbit. It passed through it in June, and it passes through it at the end of October. It is very unlikely to reach the Earth. It's going to blow up in the sky. And the best known recent example of that is the Tunguska event in Siberia, 30th of June 1908. The Tunguska event was, nobody disputes, it was definitely an airburst of a cometary fragment. And the date is interesting because the 30th of June is the height of the beta Taurids. It's one of the two times when the Earth is going through the Taurid meteor stream. Well, luckily that part of Siberia wasn't inhabited, but 2,000 square miles of forest were destroyed. If that had happened over a major city, we would all be thinking very hard about objects out of the Taurid meteor stream and about the risk of cosmic impact.
But yeah, this is just kind of, honestly, this is just kind of another thought about things that might happen in the next year or so. Like, I don't know, man, Yeah.
Well, maybe that could kind of segue us into the next topic, because then it's like, okay, some sort of coronal mass ejection event happens, or the Earth just decides to reverse its magnetic polarity all of a sudden, or, some foreign threat initiates some kind of EMP attack, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? I mean, like, Gigi's right. Don't move into the fucking smart cities. Like,
that's what they were called, I think, during a certain era. You'll own nothing, you'll be happy, but you'll have all of these video games you can hook yourself up to. You'll have, all of this convenience, but you'll be living in a smart city, which is basically high surveillance, all of that going on. But it's kind of a tough sell. The Trump administration has already said that he wants to create, quote, freedom cities. Now that is a very Orwellian name, okay, Mr. Trump, freedom cities. It doesn't benefit really anyone. This is psychotic. This is the work of psychotic technocrats that are looking to, clamp down in their, little control missions.
They'll have you living in pods and eating bugs within a week.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you do, right? Like, what is the way to move forward in the case of an emergency like that? I mean, we're so atomized now.
And we're so
And
dependent on the kind of superstructure of the machine and stuff like this, and yeah. I was listening to your conversation with Sir Matt of Footnotes to Plato recently. Great conversation, if I do say. Made a bunch of clips in case if you didn't notice. And one of the clips that I've yet to make, although I intend to, is about your conversation about kind of community building and discussing possibilities. We have the return to the land movement as kind of an object of analysis or an example of something along this line of thinking in terms of, is this what we should be doing and stuff like that, and or is this not what we should be doing?
We're putting this content out on YouTube, on the internet, and like, yeah, people go on this ride, they have these insights, and then they come back and realize that they're still sitting in front of their computer screens, they're lonely, they hate their job, we're on the verge of World War III. So like, what are we really trying to do here in this moment? What's your deeper motivation here in producing the content that you do?
well, all right, okay,
I'm trying to make it more personal here. I mean, we've been drifting around and all the big ideas, but like you and I think we both have a sense of mission. Like we want these ideas to matter in some sense, and so how do we speak to our moment?
Yeah, I think that really just brings us to the question of, okay, so once the spell is kind of broken, now what, right? Like, I was watching some stuff on this guy. His name was Seraphim Rose. He was actually a student of Alan Watts, and he ended up kind of becoming disillusioned with Watts's more Eastern New Agey thing, and so he ended up converting to Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and so he took this extremely radical kind of attitude towards it. He went out, basically built a cabin in the woods, and stayed out there and wrote and wrote and wrote and died. And so I was just watching a documentary about this, and it kind of got me thinking along these lines of like, okay, well, what do you do with all this? And I remember thinking, that is not what you do. I certainly do not think that the answer is just this complete disavowal of the world and retreating into a cabin in the woods to go be a monk and whatnot, because I'll leave room for the possibility that retreating from the world could be good for certain people, on whatever kind of path they happen to be on, but
he was writing, at least, right? I mean, he was communicating, even if the writing is sitting on some shelf somewhere, and most of it's, I don't know, is it available online? I'm not sure, but nobody reads anymore, so even if it was, it's basically lost to time. But he was at least trying to communicate from his cabin in the woods. He didn't have YouTube yet.
Well, yeah, and he is pretty popular within certain corners of the internet, and so yeah, he wasn't just completely rejecting everybody, but at the same time, it seems to me what he was trying to communicate with people, and I'm not as familiar with his Okay, am I audible now?
There you are.
Alrighty, okay. Yeah, I don't think the answer is a cabin in the woods, but at the same time, it's like, we can envision a better society, and I think we should be doing that, but I do think that maybe at this point in time, it's like, I've seen people talk about these ideas of like starting intentional communities and things like that, and I don't hate that idea by any means, but at the same time, I'm not sure if we're quite ready for that yet. I feel like there's a kind of groundwork that needs to be laid in order to really make that possible. In terms of our understanding of the world, and also the kind of agency that we need to be able to develop in order to really envision and enact some kind of alternative to modernity. So I, for one, am not necessarily in a rush to go and build some kind of community out in the middle of nowhere in South America or what have you. But I don't know. At the same time, I feel like I'm laying the groundwork for something, and I feel like the answer is never going to be trying to fix modernity through electoral politics or some kind of glorious revolution or whatever the case may be. I kind of do feel like ultimately the answer is going to have to be, like I said, trying to envision a new society that can exist alongside or somehow within Ahriman, as it were. So, yeah.
Well, Ahriman's coming. Yeah, it's interesting that you go there, because I used to, I don't know, in my 20s think about, gosh, the only future, like material future that I would want to imagine would be like, find a group of close friends and like start some kind of intentional community commune thing and return to the land and like but I'm not opposed to that, but it seems like I like this idea that like Hegel and Schelling used to talk about the invisible college. Like, yes, we're seeking a kind of ideal community, but it doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily going to be a community in the immediate present or in the near future. We could be striving for a kind of community in the far future, and I don't just mean like 50 years from now. I mean like a form. It could be that we need to evolve a form of consciousness that's going to take another million years before we can actually live in community.
And I also think there is value in sticking with it, and just kind of being in this, because like if you're off in a cabin in the woods, or if it's an intentional community of like 150 people or whatever, one thing you're not doing is you're not changing the way people within modernity are thinking about these things, the way that they're perceiving reality. I would much rather be here making my stupid YouTube videos and giving people a sense of hope than out, in the Ozarks trying to start some kind of community, because I just don't feel like we're quite ready for that yet. I feel like the thing to do right now is to be in it and to deal with the evil and the Ahriman and the social media and all this other madness. Because as horrific as it may be in certain ways, it is happening for a reason. I believe we're supposed to come out on the other side of this and be something different. We're supposed to go through this, and so I just don't. I feel like maybe at some point the answer would be to say, okay, we're done with this. Let's try something different. But I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
Becoming disillusioned with modernity, becoming disillusioned with physicalism. That is not necessarily a surefire way to lead you to good ideas. Whenever we are in a state of plasticity, where our we have our way of thinking of the world, our way of behaving, our way of orienting ourselves, and we develop it usually at a pretty young age, and at a certain point it comes to kind of rigidify, usually in our late teens or early 20s, and then, not for everybody, but for most people, we get into this kind of rigidified way of viewing the world. And that rigidification in a way is kind of necessary. It does kind of protect us in a way. It does kind of stabilize our lives and allow for human lives to interlock in cohesive ways and create society. So that process of solidification is not an evil in itself necessarily. It does serve a necessary process, I believe, but when you're calling these things into question about modernity and you start liquefying those boundaries, that edifice of ideology and whatnot, then you're in a vulnerable state. You're in a state of plasticity where you're going to want something else that feels solid. You're going to want something else that feels like the answer. And that can be extremely dangerous. And when we're talking about a new modernity, you know, we could, you know, to riff on, was it Bruno Latour, I believe he said, we have never been modern. Modernity should be the realization of a kind of individual freedom, not just in the sense of liberation, but in the sense of a kind of creative agency and moral agency and intellectual agency that have never fully germinated. And so I think I want to kind of loop this back around to what I was saying much earlier about how we're not quite ready to go and you know, start some kind of new modernity yet, because in order to do that, we have to actually be modern first. And in a sense, we never have. We have never developed those powers yet. And we're in the process of doing that. But once we have, then I think that's what's going to really open up new possibilities for us. It's not, like new technologies could be great, you know, new ways of doing ecology and whatnot. But I think it's the one thing that has to be conserved in a new kind of modernity is human individuality, because that's what this entire process has been attempting to cultivate. And so we somehow have to figure out how to have socialization and solidarity and communality while also maintaining individualism. And I don't think that's ever been done before, ever. I mean, you know, when you look to the closest approximations of you know, self-sufficient communal human life, you know, you can point to the Mennonites and the Amish, or even to modern tribal hunter-gatherers. But all of those examples have social technologies which are intentionally oriented towards crushing individual human agency and reintegrating the human being into the collective. Somehow we have to figure out how to achieve that end, the end of social cohesion, without crushing that. And instead look at it the other way, that somehow individual agency is what will facilitate that kind of solidarity.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. The importance of the individual and the importance of remembering that individuals are the products of loving communities. So you know, you can't really value one without the other. Somebody even commented, like, people in this chat really like to talk about themselves. But yeah, let's
yes, that succeeded. I've attracted all the people who still have their egos intact. Lovely. Okay, all right.
I'll be back in a minute. But it's also, I think there's something unique about, at least what I perceive to be the mission of America, the spiritual mission of America, if I can put it that way, which is different from what Steiner was, where Steiner was speaking from, which is more the mission of the Central European peoples. And he was very explicit about the fact that he was speaking from that cultural point of view, and that American anthroposophists could rightly speak from a different point of view. And I think the United States is a different kind of project that's not nativist in the sense of that it's rooted in blood bonds. This country is founded on ideas. At least I would want to believe that this country is founded on the ideas of freedom, and individual freedom and social justice is one way of simply capturing the ideals that I think found this country. And to think that this is a white country, or to think that it's a Christian country, or to try to reduce what the ideals of America are to one of these particular religions or particular bloodlines, I think is to miss an opportunity. And that really this country is exceptional in the sense that it's the place where we're trying to discover the human being as a truly transnational being, as a being beyond the blood bond that could be really universal. And I think liberalism hasn't fully lived up to that ideal. And so this needs to be a conception of the individual and like universal human rights in a way that's post-liberal in a sense. But I do think that liberalism has at least pointed us in the right direction in emphasizing individual freedom and universal human rights as like important in a way that fascism and communism kind of missed a little bit. And I think
Indeed.
America is like ground zero for the realization of these values. And if we can't do it here, no one else is gonna be able to do it, because there's, you know, no one else is as freed from those blood bonds because we're such a diverse country. I mean, you know, Brazil is diverse, Europe's increasingly diverse, but like, and of course there's a lot of racial tension. The diversity in the United States is very fractious, but I think we're closest to having some universal ideal of the human that is inclusive of, but also beyond any of those particular cultural diversities. We're closer to that in this country than anywhere else. And so if we can't do it, I don't know who else can.
I think this is yeah, I think we're actually getting very close to what we touched upon earlier with this idea of the destiny of the United States and whatnot, because you know, societies historically have been able to cohere on the basis of one of two principles. And you can see it pretty much cut exactly down, you know, East versus West here, where within the East, the fundamental principle has been cultural and ethnic homogeneity. The Chinese Empire, as it spread, its modus operandi was transforming conquered peoples into Han Chinese. That was just how they operated. You're going to do things like Han Chinese. You're going to speak our language. You're going to bathe like we do. You're going to use our currency. You're going to use our writing system. You're going to do your hair like Han Chinese, because to them that was how you established social order, was through that kind of homogeneity. Now in the West, the trajectory has always been in the opposite direction. Even going back to like the Achaemenid Empire and Alexander the Great's empire and the Roman Empire, within that Middle Eastern and Mediterranean world, it was just never conceivable to achieve that kind of homogeneity. There always had to be this attitude of a kind of laissez-faire in a way where okay, you can keep your gods, you can keep your cultural traditions, you can keep your ethnicity or whatever. Just pay your taxes to Rome and we won't fucking kill you. Deal? You know, and that was how it operated. And I feel like a lot of the more radically conservative tendencies in the West, whether they realize it or not, are actually kind of relapsing, much like Heidegger did, into a kind of valorization of an Eastern way of doing things, which is ironically completely antithetical to the entire Western ethos. And America, I think, is really the ground zero of this in a sense, because you've got a society that really can only achieve a kind of unified cohesion through a central teleology, a central mission, right? Because it's never going to be a sense of racial identity. It's never going to be a sense of like, oh, my ancestors were here for thousands of years. No, they weren't. Like, it's never going to be cultural homogeneity. I mean, these things just aren't going to happen. It's going to have to be interwoven through through a sense of shared destiny and meaning. And the unfortunate truth about that is when that sense of self-identity, that sense of shared mission breaks down, it's a disaster, because we don't have any other kind of glue holding us together. And so we have to do that right. And when we don't do it right, then you know, we're at each other's throats. We devolve back into this bloodthirsty tribalism, because that's the only thing underneath that. But at the same time, that's kind of the fire under our asses, as it were, that necessitates us towards the realization of that other modernity, let's say, that we talked about previously.
Yeah. Yeah, that brings me to maybe our final pivot tonight can be to look ahead to 2025.
And I feel like I heard your argument, and it made a lot of kind of sense in a way where
what we ultimately find is a crucial enactment of a broader pattern, which is in fact an overarching motif of this entire evolutionary process: the gradual awakening of human individuality and subjectivity.
We can't, insofar as community building is relevant, the danger would be to kind of return to the modern part of the chiastic pattern, like of the hourglass, where we have kind of animal consciousness of being etherically interconnected with everything, but we don't really have an individual sense of individuality, like a personalized ego, or in a way, if you want to put it that way. But then with kind of the scientific and really the Renaissance and stuff, like we have the transition to a more personal awareness, and then the danger would be to re-enter kind of that, I suppose it would be like the etheric communal aspect of things without kind of fully developing the modern stage, like it would be a regression rather than a return with a difference, let's say, like almost like final participation as opposed to just a return to original participation, as Barfield would talk about it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And however, I wonder about I feel like it's kind of necessary in a sense that like we do kind of more intentional relating or something. And the line that stuck out to me, you said like we have to be modern in order to do the new modernity or the replacement modernity thing. And that's kind of like yeah, I totally agree with that. And I wonder if it would maybe be down to the individual level to be like, all right, I am thoroughly modern. Now I am allowed to do the community thing. Like I wonder if there are some among us who are, not to claim myself, but like, like who are kind of aware of that distinction.
A truth has to be something that you do,
which is important, I think, that they can't just be subsumed into a group, but I'm trying to answer the question ultimately is like, what do we do in kind of these modern conditions where, the whole grid might go down and we're super reliant and we're atomized and alienated. Like, I think a solution would be to kind of clarify that distinction and then to seek the community or something like that. Like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Does that kind of like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems like, I mean, even if we're not, going off and building log cabins in the fucking woods, like there still needs to be something here. There still needs to be some kind of way of networking people and being able to address problems in states of emergency and things like that. Nothing like that even remotely exists right now. I mean, the closest approximation you get to that is these stupid fucking like anarcho-liberals, and they're like, what do they call it? Mutual aid groups, which is just like 10 people and like some canned food and like it's like,
or like you had the thing that popped up in what was it, Washington, when they had the like the independent zone or whatever the fuck they called it,
vapid, ineffectual nonsense. Like even the hippie movement and the punk rock movement and everything else, even the anarchists up on the the west coast trying to do their little independent state in the middle of was it Portland or Seattle, whatever. Regardless, I mean, if you example after example, and these weren't even necessarily violent. The machine is really good at taking like things like that and just, first of all, just not being harmed by it at all, but then just taking it in, just subsuming it, and it you know, it took the hippie movement, processed it a little bit, you know, and you know, put it in a nice little plastic package and put it on a shelf for you to buy, right? And it's going to do that with everything when we're not smart about this, and when we just think that, you know, being rebellious is good enough. It's not.
They were trying
to basically just a bunch of tents, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we're declaring independence," and then
like it really is. This is kind of the difficulty of this topic in general, is that it's so anathema to our custom ways of being and like our comfortable lifestyles, you know. And that's kind of the difficulty, I think, is that we're kind of called to, like, I don't know, to do something.
We do have to discuss it at length.
But I don't know exactly what it is. But I feel like it probably includes some degree of localism or embodied relations, you know, like it can't just be videos and stuff, you know, as great as that is, like, you know, but
yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely true. It's just, you got to generate interest in that kind of thing first. I mean, unfortunately, the numbers of people who are on the kind of wavelength that would be commendable to that, not commendable, what's the word I'm looking for? That would be amenable. Is that the word I'm looking for? Whatever. Anyway, the people who would be down for actually putting in some elbow grease to that kind of thing are very small. Well, you know, I say that, but then you got to understand, real life is very different than the internet. The internet is full of fucking Redditors, like, and, you know, fedora wearing, like, new atheists and that kind of thing, and tech bros and shit. But, like, real world is, like, full of real people who, like, aren't that ideologically committed to anything anyway. And nonetheless, they do feel the sense of isolation and alienation that we're talking about here. And so that in itself is potential fuel for the fire. So yeah, I mean, some kind of networking would absolutely be a good idea. But beyond that, I did want to bring this up, though, is like, you know, what's the end game look like? And, you know, this is getting much more speculative here, but, you know, ultimately, I think the moral of the story, or really the third act, if you will, has to be something like humanity somehow redeeming Ahriman.
Yeah, this is one of the things this is exactly where I think is the right way to go, in a sense. Like, a word that was coming up in my head as you're starting to talk there was the word bifurcation, which was thrown around by Steiner a bit.
There's no way to deny the situation we find ourselves in, which, you know, we're going to very quickly in the next, probably in our lifetimes, have a situation where there's a real, like, speciation event where people are going to be like the next version of the iPhone in terms of, like, the communications revolution, new technology that changes everything. There's a before and after. Is going to be an implant of some kind. It's going to be like a kind of nervous system interface that's, it's just another step along the path we've already been on, but at the same time, it's going to cross the skin boundary in some sense. And so what's artificial and what's natural is going to break down. So the transhuman revolution is upon us, or going to happen, and we have to contend with that. If we are spiritual, or, you know, I'll just use that word and we can talk about what it means, then for whatever our reasons are, we're going to want to say, there's something important about what the human being is that gets diminished and shrunken, and goes off track if it fully embraces this mechanization of not just of nature, but of the human as well. And there's something to be communed with, and something to be learned from that would be beyond what can be programmed or reduced to an algorithm, and that the only way we can relate to that is not going to be through our calculative intellect, our mechanistic mind, but through a form of, well, various other organs of perception like imagination, inspiration, intuition.
And seeing empathy as an epistemological faculty.
And in this concept of the eighth sphere.
If you look further on, you're going to see that there's a bifurcation of humanity. There's going to be a good humanity and a bad humanity. In the future, whenever you incarnate, all of your good and bad deeds will be written on your face and with your own physiognomy. So you can look at a person in, let's just say, next incarnation or the incarnation after that, they won't have to speak for them to let you know whether they're good or evil. It will be written on their face. And there will be vehicles that will be so turned to evil that there'll be very few for the people who Steiner calls the remnant, or those that some would call the raptured, or those who are harvested in the description in the Apocalypse. Well, those people are going to be wearing the white tunic. They're going to be preaching the eternal gospel. In other words, that we're immortal beings. We are not materialistic beings who are going to nihilistically die into a cold, dead grave, and that's the end of entropy. No, we are immortal beings. And once you know that, you preach the eternal gospel and you sing the new song of the Lamb or of Judah. And what is that song? Well, what you're preaching, what you're saying, what you're singing, what you're seeing, the fact that you're dressed in a white tunic shows that all three realms of the angels, archangels, and archai are acting through you. That's the good people. And the descriptions are very clear what happens with them. And you will find that it is a victory story. But you can go on the internet and you can go on Facebook or anywhere on the internet, and you're going to find people preaching about the eighth sphere. You hear people constantly talking about the eighth sphere, but they don't know what that is. The eighth sphere is the slag of the Earth incarnation that isn't going to make it. It's not going to evolve. It's basically going to be the throwaway trash of the Earth. Humanity is going to be turned into basically the good magicians, the pseudo-angel people, and the black magicians who then control the people who Steiner calls the slug people, who are just basically crawling around in the mud of their own bad karma, or insect people. He gives very specific names for these. I'm not going to mention it because I once got a video kicked off for saying these words, so I'm sure I'd get flagged if I said them. It's in the book. But you can read the scariest things about the future in this book. And that's right. If you think it is a walk down a primrose path, you are severely mistaken. Our job is to develop an ego. Well, what's the first thing that a human does when they get an ego? They become selfish. And they go the path of perdition of the seven deadly sins, which is a Luciferic delusion and an Ahrimanic imprisonment. That's what we do. And so what's going to happen in the future? If we can't confront evil and discern it and tell it to get behind us and not be part of it and not, again, be another fallen rank of the hierarchy, then we need to develop our relationship with our own guardian angel, which is our own angel. It's our own spirit self, Rudolf Steiner calls it. And so that is the task of the future. There may be nasty things coming for some people who are going to devolve, but there's wonderful things happening to open our eyes, our ears, and our heart and our actions to the spiritual world and become the eyes, ears, hands, and heart of the divine on the earth. And as we do that, then angels start to communicate with us and we can communicate with them.
And this idea of the redemption of Ahriman, insofar as like, I'm not sure if you've heard of Andrew Linnell. He's the anthroposophical dude in Boston who
seems to be the world's authority on transhumanism and anthroposophy.
He also has a channel or a company. I'm not sure I don't think it's a company, but it's called Mistech, and he's talking a lot about like the redemption of technologies and in an anthroposophical framework. And it really kind of blew my mind thinking about this concept of the redemption of Ahriman.
We can make technology that does not destroy. Here, Steiner called for the lab bench to become the altar, bringing Christ right into, these devices. Doing transformation in our time is necessary. And this is a goal of Mystech.
I'm still trying to get my head around it. And also the eighth sphere, insofar as talking about the end game and the big picture, I found myself hesitating a bit in realizing that ultimately Steiner is suggesting that we are to become like angels and become etherealized in the
Now it is our understanding that these gods of yours plan for you to be here only temporarily. Once you are gone, we were promised these bodies and the earth. Further, we understand that your time here is planned to end about the year 5700. We're not telling you to go. You all are welcome to stay. But can you blame us for preparing now for that which is coming, that coming change? This will be an important process for you as well as for me and my guys. Ari, we agree on this.
That there will be, it does kind of seem a little bit Gnostic in the bad sense of like getting away from the body, but it also kind of seems like maybe there's a spiritualization of the body into an etheric mode, right? Like that's the etherization of the blood thing, which I don't fully understand, but it's just tricky in this idea of, are we to remain, like in big picture terms, he talked about eventually there would be like no more sexual procreation, and like people would interact with their bodies, I guess, more as like automobiles, like they kind of get in and out of vehicles. And it's just kind of this amorphous thing that I'm trying to get my head around, because it kind of is the question at hand when it comes to bifurcation, or like how do we relate to transhumanism and stuff, like are we maybe called to, like, Steiner said we're not supposed to just disengage and like go off into the woods, but that we're supposed to like redeem the technologies in some sense.
A small group of individuals from all around the world will carry human life and culture over to the sixth epoch. During the time before the war of all against all, human beings will find their way into an existence where their lowest bodily member is no longer the physical, but their etheric. Let me repeat that in different words. By 5700, many people will have a relationship to their physical that can be compared to your current relationship to your automobile. Such people will have their etheric body as their lowest member.
And I don't know, I don't even know how to kind of pin it down, but I'm wondering, I guess the question would be, is it kind of this go off into the ether?
Ahriman is the being who caused the densification, calcification of substance all the way down to the midpoint, to the incarnation of Christ, which is called the turning point of time. It's the lowest, densest part of incarnation. And then Christ redeemed it, and it started to go up into the realm of redeeming the earth.
Here you see in blue the intended path of our evolution. We would have been beings that circled around the earth. Because of Eden, we fell, the first fall, to the black curve. Now we are approaching, and it has already begun, when we, out of freedom, decide our future, to follow the path of Christ or to remain with the physical and thereby fall with our double, or perhaps to remain human
Like that's ultimately maybe, but it's a process, takes time, can't be too quickly.
What I would say is that there is a great danger on two sides. So, in one, if you say, I'm going to loosen and I'm going to discard my physical, I'm going to go live up in the etheric, in a way, you are making yourself a candidate to be easily grabbed by Lucifer.
I don't know. That's kind of an amorphous non-question, but
Well, I mean, honestly, I'm not convinced that Steiner was right about all that, honestly. And so in a lot of ways, Steiner is kind of an Aristotelian. So the Aristotelian eschatology is something like this. The spirit, the form is that which acts on the body, and you've got this kind of gulf between incarnation and what the form is trying to shape matter into, and the ultimate end game for that is a kind of spiritualization by which the that gap is fully closed, that there's no more potentiality in substance anymore, because substance has become fully dematerialized by spirit. And so that way the substance is just a perfect instantiation of form. And from from kind of an orthodox Aristotelian perspective, that makes sense, because forms are static, eternal objects. Aristotle conceptualized the forms in the same way that Plato did for the most part. Steiner does not. But how he differs from Plato and Aristotle is interesting. So he talks about this in his discussion of medieval nominalism, and he says, imagine he's kind of going through the Gnostic argument. He says, you can imagine a triangle. You can imagine an equilateral triangle and a right triangle, an obtuse triangle, and a rock shaped like a triangle, and a triangular bell or something, whatever. But you cannot envision a triangle in general, the ultimate form of triangleness that unifies all the different triangles together. Now, the nominalist argument here would be that there is no triangle in general. This is a category which only exists within minds. Okay, and so this is where things get a little weird here, because eventually that's going to be taken in a strictly perspectival direction, in which the categories are strictly contents of human consciousness that aren't in the world at all. Within the nominalist way of looking at things, you also have the mind of God, and so you could kind of take that kind of nominalism and show that it's very close to a kind of Berkeleyan idealism, actually. But anyway, what Steiner does is this. Steiner says, actually, you can imagine the triangle in general, because here's what you do when you think of the triangle in general. You imagine like an equilateral triangle, but then you can shape it into different kinds of triangles. You can take the points and the lines and you can move them to make different kinds of triangles. And so he says that in doing this, what we're effectively doing is we're moving up from an etheric way of perceiving form to an astral way of perceiving form. And so he believes that within the that kind of Aristotelian Platonic mental structure of consciousness, it was still possible for human beings to actually perceive the etheric around us, because we could actually perceive the forms that were acting on matter, but it was specifically static forms, specifically forms that in themselves did not change, but only resulted in change through the way that they kind of teleologically acted upon matter. Steiner is saying, no, actually forms themselves, if we move up from that etheric realm into the astral, then we get to forms or concepts or whatever that actually can move around. I don't think Steiner's actually right about this. The nominalists are actually right, believe it or not. I think that they're correct here. You can't imagine a triangle in general. You can, but you don't actually do what Steiner's describing here. What's really going on in order to take that equilateral triangle in your mind and figure out how to move it into different positions and stuff. Let's say you're trying to build something, right? And you're having to envision the different forms that you're going to then try and instantiate. So you're like, okay, I'm making this thing out of different kinds of triangles, and so in my mind, I've got to be able to move my mental triangle around and reshape it into different ways so that I can implement different kinds of triangles in the thing that I'm making, right? In order for there to be a lot of different permutations of triangleness up there, what you're actually doing is you're taking these mental pictures and you're contrasting them with one another, and you're kind of sewing them together in different ways. It's not just a motion that's happening here. There's a compositeness that's happening here. And I think this is where these ideas of like morphogenetic fields come into play. The way that Sheldrake describes the morphogenetic field as almost being like a composite image of all the different instantiations of that field in a way. So what does that imply? Think about that for a minute. What that implies is that and really this applies to Steiner too in a sense, but it implies that the spirit itself, the aura, the field, the noemata, whatever you want to call that, is itself characterized by an indeterminacy because of its compositeness, because of fundamentally what it is it is the spiritualization of past events, which are now becoming the contents of the mental pole of the organism. So you in your life, you do certain things, you form certain habits. What's happening is those activities, those things that you're doing, especially things you're doing repeatedly, are being kind of incorporated into that composite image, which is your subtle body, effectively. Or your spirit. The thing is, those things are almost synonymous. They're not, but in any case, you end up with this thing where it's like the spirit, let's say, is characterized by an indeterminacy, a kind of formlessness, and therefore a kind of potentiality. So that it's not just there in the matter. It's not like the cora, the darkness, as it were, is there in the spirit world too, right? And so the way that the Aristotelian Christians are thinking of it is they're thinking of it, okay, we're going to spiritualize our substance in such a way that we become no longer bodily, not really anymore. We become a kind of immaterial substance. We get away from the pure darkness and indeterminacy of the prima materia, the prime matter, right? The great mother. That's what it's trying to get away from. It's the Jungian individuation process that's happening here. But you don't actually get away from it. The way that we actually have to move through this once we've achieved the kind of perspectival consciousness and been able to come into confrontation with the darkness of our own subjectivity, the void of our own subjectivity, as someone like Hegel or Zizek would put it. Then the way you move through that is by realizing that the pleroma, the spirit world, whatever, the darkness is there too. And so there's this kind of reunion that happens. So what does this then imply about Steiner's eschatology then? Because it's very Aristotelian in a way. I'm not sure if he's right about any of that, frankly. I don't know if we're gonna be able to. Well, I shouldn't even say be able to. I don't think it's desirable to escape the body and turn into these like nebulous clouds of spirit or some shit. I don't think that's what's going on here, and I don't think that's implied by the underlying metaphysics of Christianity either. All of this stuff about becoming a purely spiritual body, every bit of that is ad hoc. None of that's there in the fucking Gospels. What it says is that the body, the flesh and blood, this one is the thing that will be redeemed and resurrected. So
that's debatable. Yeah. That's debatable, but in terms of scriptural stuff, I'm no scripture expert, but but yeah, no, I get your sentiment.
All I've ever written on the issue of the resurrection is to repeat exactly what St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 and point out that he said it. This is known to any seminarian with a good New Testament teacher. I've said nothing radical on the matter.
There's only one person in the New Testament who said, I have seen the Lord first person, meaning that person's writing and saying, I've seen the Lord. And you ask him, his name is Paul, what did you see? What kind of a body? And he said, well, it was spiritual. It was glorious. It was powerful. It was heavenly. It was a wind body. Okay. First person testimony. That's what he saw. So followers of Jesus later began to worry about that. This is after 70, I think. This is into the second century, late first century, early second century. And they began to come up with stories about actually experiencing the physical Jesus. Right, so nobody could say it was just a ghost. Apologetics came in. They're worried that people in the pagan, Greek, and Roman world are going to say, you have these appearances, but how do you know they weren't ghosts? People claim to see all kinds of things. How do you know it wasn't an apparition or just some hallucination?
He believed that the body of flesh and blood would not be raised as a body of flesh and blood. He didn't say it wouldn't be physical. He believed in a body, but it would be composed of something called spirit, which for him is not a disembodied, an anti-corporeal something. It's an actual element of nature. It's breath, wind, spirit, life, mind, and it has a kind of ethereal constitution.
So I think it's pretty clear that the earliest Christian view of resurrection faith was not a resuscitated corpse or physical body appearing for 7 days in Jerusalem and later in the Galilee and convincing them, touch me, let me eat with you. That's resurrection. That's not Paul's view of resurrection.
When he says flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven, that's what he means. When he says that what's raised is a pneumatic or spiritual body, differently constituted, devoid of flesh and blood, that's what he means. So,
the earliest tradition was he ascended to heaven in a glorified body, sits at the right hand of God, and then people had visions and sightings of Jesus, as Paul said.
I'm not denying a physical resurrection. I don't even know what that would mean, since resurrection obviously means the return, an embodied return. Now, for Paul, it's also quite possible that for him, resurrection also means ascent through the heavens.
You're basically entering through Orion, and then through Orion you join the Milky Way, and you travel through those stars, and you're on your way to the galactic center, which is between Scorpius and Sagittarius. That is the birthplace of creation. It's the place you return to.
But yeah, no, I get your sentiment. And yeah, it's like, I don't know, man. It's hard stuff to wrap one's head around, because in Steiner's cosmology, it's also that there is the purpose of, like, there's kind of a redeeming of there is like a function, and like I imagine there's something that's kind of carried.
Basically, the intent of the earth is to leave minerals behind. That's when minerals were created. Minerals, plants, animals, humans, right? So it's the oldest substance. But in the end, it's going to be the substance that transforms all of this stuff in the future too. Spiritualized minerals and also materialized minerals.
I don't know though. I get like that real impression, like you were saying about it, how it's very Aristotelian kind of.
Well, let me tie that in a bow real quick because I was kind of rambling here, but like,
Sure.
Within that Aristotelian way of looking at it, you can close that gap so there's no more potentiality. You just have pure actuality as such, which means no indeterminacy. You just have the form and its material instantiation, and those are now identical. So that's the, the Aristotelian Christian understanding of spiritualization and the eschaton. If the spirit is really the kind of taking the past and making it into this kind of composite field image thing, then, first of all, it means that it's not a closing of that gap exactly. It's more like all of the different events in the past, so the body of the organism, are being arranged compositionally within that spirit body or whatever in such a way that there's a kind of unity, a kind of sublimation that happens there. So what that would then imply is that the bodily aspect, the corporeal aspect, doesn't go away. It can't go away. These things are mirror images of one another. So I don't know. Maybe you could say that, well, even in that view, that the mineral kingdom could drop out, and so you would only have the etheric and the astral bodies, and so you still have a bodily realm of some sort, even though we've kind of transcended what we think of as just like raw mineral physicality. But even then, I don't know, because like even within Steiner's own view of this, like the final stage is supposed to be the spiritualization of the physical, right? Because you get that kind of hourglass thing, and so it's like as the ego is moving up, it's like the physical and then the etheric and then the astral and then the lowest level of the soul or mind or psyche or whatever, and then you go to the middle thing, which Steiner's got his own terminology for this, but for me, that's the Renaissance. And then as you start to move up into the top part of the hourglass, those two are mirrors of one another. So then you're going to be going through the same thing in reverse, right? So it'll be like mental and then astral and then etheric and then physical will be the last one. And that will be, I believe, the point at which the physicality itself will be incorporated into the human ego, right? At this point, at this stage of our development, it's like, what do we really have control of as egos? We can control our bodies, we can move them around kind of most of the time, we can talk, we can control our inner worlds of mental images and stuff, and that's it, more or less. There's more that you can do than that, but it's difficult. You can do things like biofeedback training, for example, and learn to control different parts of your body in ways that you wouldn't normally be able to do. But what is implied here by this future trajectory, I would say, is that as we're moving up through that top part of the hourglass, we're going to be able to wield voluntary agency over the entirety of the etheric body, the entirety of the astral body, and ultimately the entirety of the physical body. So what would that entail? I mean, that being able to incorporate the physical body into your ego.
This reminds me of Eurythmy, personally.
Right.
Insofar as like to become essentially to indwell the body with the ego in a sense. It's kind of hard to like fully, I don't know, it's hard to just describe, I don't know, because that corresponds more with the astral. That's very interesting. That's very yeah, I see kind of where you're going with that. And maybe the best way to kind of examine it would be to break it down into the most immediate stage in terms of, in terms of thinking, kind of bringing it back towards how we might appropriately respond to our current time period. Like, I haven't watched your original Ever Present Origin series, or maybe I did, and it was just a while ago and I've forgotten all the pieces, but maybe connecting up to that would be helpful. Because I also have questions about that. Because, you have the magic, then the mythical, and then what comes after that? I'm not...
It's archaic, magical, mythical, mental, and then for Gebser after that is integral, but he is wrong. He is wrong because there's the perspectival. That's its own thing. And then there's what he calls the integral after that.
Okay. Yeah, I was watching that, trying to map it to trying to predict where you're going to be going next. And yeah, because I'm wondering how it relates to, I don't know, particularly when you were describing the magical in relation to kind of like these spiritual faculties that it seems autistic people might have, at least particular types of autistic people. I don't know, it's really making me think of these kind of mind reading dynamics, or like etheric insight into
the beautiful human form. This inner human being, however, also wants to go out into all expanses, wants to express externally, wants to bring to expression that which has been soulfully compressed into a point. When we create something cosmic in our own movements, as is the case with eurythmy, then out of the human being, at least pictorially at first, a kind of new cosmos is born.
Empathic resonance with the people around me type of thing, like a diffusation of boundaries between people, insofar as, I don't know, being able to see into these subtle things, like perhaps the etheric. And I don't know, maybe if you just say something about how the next stage in the process, even though you kind of haven't gotten into that yet on your updated series, but like insofar as where we're at now, and how the next stage would relate to either these kind of faculties that are perhaps related via the telepathy tips, or like the etherization of the blood, perhaps. I realize it's kind of a big question, but it's like, how can we understand our immediate kind of evolutionary trajectory, and how that might be seen in light of a more grand thing where it's not necessarily just about escaping the body or anything. And the last thing I'll throw in here was I was listening to Douglas Gabriel talking about the eighth sphere, and he had the phrase at one point, spiritualized minerals.
On Jupiter, the densest matter of the next incarnation of the Earth on Jupiter, there'll be a planet, but you'll be able to see through it, because there'll be nothing saved from Earth that you can perceive with your senses right now. None of that. But spiritualized minerals, and also materialized minerals, will be carried over. But some, of course, won't be able to follow that, and they will get stuck here, the sphere of electromagnetism. But the Trinity and the hierarchy always takes care of everyone. Ultimately, when humans go on to be angels, that in Jupiter, these beings will be on a moon that is kind of like a muck of mud. And in the future, as we go up into Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan, Angel, Archangel, Archai, these subhumans that come out of the eighth sphere during the Earth incarnation of the Earth will be working to pull them up out of that sphere. Because when you reach the rank of an angel in the Jupiter sphere, if you're a human who's become an angel in the Jupiter sphere, you won't be able to witness suffering without you directly giving up a part of yourself to help stop that suffering. The beings in the eighth sphere on the Earth right now that go to the moon of Jupiter, that go to the moon of Venus, that then basically go out into the cosmos after that, it all gets turned into a big mush. but it's a mush that remembers. It's a mush that remembers every single thing. It's the akasha. It's the akashic soup.
He said that you leave the minerals behind, but there would be spiritualized minerals, and it's like it gets confusing and complicated, but I don't know. Yeah, please take it away, however you so see fit.
Yeah. So, yeah, as for Douglas Gabriel, I have no idea what he's talking about half the time, so I'm just gonna let that be.
Okay.
But I love listening to him, but yeah, he's way further down the Steiner rabbit hole than I am. So, anywho, with regards to where we're at right now, yeah, where are we right now? That's a good question because yeah, like I said, Gebser kind of skips perspectival because he regards it as just kind of like the late stage of the mental structure, and I don't think it is. It's not. It's its own thing, and it's a big deal. Like it's a really big deal, and you know, when we're talking about integral or imaginal or whatever we want to call the post-perspectival stage, I think we do see the germs of that already and that they've been here for a while. I think we do see that in the kind of second generation of the German idealist movement. And so it's here. I mean, that kind of integral consciousness, it's available to us, but as a collective, I'm kind of leaning towards the conclusion that we're not even done with perspectival yet. And the reason I say that is because I think the significance of the perspectival ultimately is this realization that our subjectivity, our I amness, as it were, is what Aristotle would call the proteousia, the kind of the ultimate ground of being, right? And so I've been looking at this trajectory that you see moving throughout the Middle Ages into modernity of the nominalists, and then Descartes, and then Kant, and then Fichte, and so forth. You get this very interesting progression here of subjectivity coming to an awareness of itself as the self-conceptualization of awareness, which is a very convoluted Heideggerian way of putting that, I suppose. Heideggerian in the sense that it's borderline incomprehensible, but
you could also put it in like a Christian sense where it's like, you know, realizing your oneness with God in a way, right? Like
well, I mean, it's that, but it's more specific than that, I think, because it's not just
as particularized in your I amness, like,
because if you put it that way, then you could just translate it directly into this kind of Atman is Brahman from the Indic tradition and say that it's nothing new, but it is something new. It's this realization that subjectivity, so not just awareness, not just consciousness, capital C in the super general sense, but this sense of selfhood, the sense of self-identity that we human beings have, is itself an ultimate cosmic principle, and that it is identical, in fact, with the Logos, with the Christos, with whatever, and therefore that if you kind of strip everything else away, what you're left with when you really look at that subjectivity, it's an affirmation of existence itself and a will to the realization of becoming, of numinosity, of being, of unity.
Experiential intensity. Experiential intensity is one way.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it too. And that is the core of not only our existence, but existence itself. Is that we are like even beyond our own personal subjectivity. I mean, all the cats and dogs and trees and stuff are like organs of the cosmic subjectivity, because it is all I amness, as it were. And it's absolutely breathtakingly spooky that you see this in the Hebrew Bible. When the burning bush says to Moses, I am the I am, and he's like, I don't really understand what that means, but when I go to the Hebrew people, who should I tell them sent me? And the burning bush says, tell them I am sent you. And it's crazy that, like, I mean, you look at all these different theological interpretations of that, and it's like, oh, well, he's saying that he will always be with you, or he can be whatever he wants to be. Like, there's all these different interpretations, but like, no one wants to just interpret it literally. It is subjectivity itself that is speaking to Moses. Like, and that's what sets this whole progression in motion here. So anyway, point being, the reason I'm saying I don't think as a collective we're even done with perspectival yet, because I think as a collective we haven't even really gotten to the point where we're able to recognize our own subjectivity for what it actually is. It's like the furthest we've gotten is this just kind of postmodern relativism where everything is like just kind of dissolved into this sea of equal perspectives. But nonetheless, it is true that the next stage is already in the process of blooming forth as well. So we'll see what happens, I suppose.
Yeah, the next would that, again, I'm still a bit unclear in terms of like the ultimate sense as it relates to the body. I like this idea that you were saying about compositeness. I'm still trying to get my head around that too, but something about that strikes me as very correct. But
so let me come back to that real quick then, because I was like super rushing through that. So what I was gesturing towards there was this idea that like and I really initially got this from Sheldrake that like, let's say you got a rat, and your rat is doing a whole bunch of different things, and you're teaching it new things, and so its behavior is, you could see it as the navigation of this field of possible things the rat could do. So that's its astral body in a sense. Or, well, really, that would be, I guess you'd say, it's astral spirit in a way, like the spiritual equivalent of the astral body, because the astral body is bodily. It's the past, not the present field of possibilities. But again, these things mirror one another. So that present field of possibilities you're navigating is the composite of the past, right? And so this is the reason why the bodily aspects can then be spiritualized into, because what's happening there is all the different events that make up the bodily aspects are being organized into that spiritual aura thing, right? So for example, your rat is doing stuff, and you're trying to teach it to, I don't know, do some kind of trick or whatever, right? And you give it some kind of reward for that, like some food. And so what is it doing there when it's learning? Is it's taking that vast composite of different experiences which it has had, which makes up its astral body, and it's reorganizing them. Like, okay, this experience is one where I got the good thing, so I'm going to put that closer to the center of behavioral gravity, as it were. And so there's this organization of the past that's happening as the past is being integrated into that aura. Now, currently, this is something that happens in a more or less passive way. We can change our behaviors, we can do different things, but we don't have a capacity to really have direct agency over that process yet. But we will. I think that's what Steiner's pointing to here, even if I don't quite agree with him on what all this means about the body. Nonetheless, when he talks about, like, as we go through these higher stages in the future Jupiter and Venus and Vulcan and all that crap, This, I believe, is what he's talking about. He's talking about this process by which we're going to be able to take all of the past instances that make up that vast composite and actively bring them into alignment with the telos, which is the core of our subjectivity. And that's the eschaton.
Hmm. Hmm. As I understand it, the so in this hourglass shape, then it am I correct in thinking that it's the etheric, so it goes physical, etheric, then astral, then I is at this turning point with subjectivity, right? The realization of I amness. And then after that it would be the astral afterwards, like a re-spiritualized, like this is the composite astral thing that comes next, or
So you have the physical body, etheric body, astral body, what I call the psychical body. Steiner calls it the sentient soul, but I don't think he thinks of it the same way that I do. But it's like just think of it as like all the thoughts you've had in the past, basically. Past mental activities make up that. It's the bodily aspect of the psyche, right? And so that's the highest part of the pyramid, and then the middle, that's pure subjectivity itself. That is ousia. That is that's the crux. That's perspectival consciousness. And then you move up, and then it just mirrors, right? So then you're going psychical, astral, etheric, and then physical at the top.
okay. I'm trying to get a felt sense for like the type of faculty slash ability that you see as most kind of fitting to our time, insofar as like the one that makes the most sense to me is this idea that the animal is kind of the astral. I mean, the animal is the etheric interconnectedness with everything else. And I was reminded of like when you were talking about the telepathy tips, almost as like this I don't know, I think about that almost as like etheric insight or something.
The individual human ego comes to recreate the various structures of consciousness throughout its psychological development. Within the womb, one's consciousness mirrors that of the archaic structure. Between birth and the age of approximately 7, the magical sense of self develops. Between roughly 7 and 14, the mythical self develops, and so forth. But for certain individuals, even in the modern world, the mythical stage of development does not occur, or at least does not occur in a typical manner, and the receptivity of magical awareness does not dissipate either.
But I think I might have that.
No, that's correct. I mean, the astral is what we share in common with animals.
Okay, yeah.
Plants, yeah.
Within the ever-present origin, Gebser tells us that mythical awareness came to conceptualize the human self as consisting of 2 fundamental aspects, which Gebser refers to as the life soul and the death soul. The death soul is the sense of self as a transcendental object. It is the experience of one's own individual personhood as a kind of universal form which is able to transcend the particularity of one's immanent embodied existence. The breath of life which mediates between the heavens and the earth, and, crucially, which differentiates plant life and animal life. Elemental air is characterized by the principle of levity, which counters the densifying and gravitational principles of earth, such that animals are no longer moored to the earth, but rather are able to move about freely just as air is able to flow above the earth's surface. The death soul can just as easily be understood as the stellar soul, due to its archetypal affinity with the sun. Another crucial feature which distinguishes animal life from plant life is the presence of eyes, which obviously have a very intimate relationship with light and, by extension, the sun. Eyes are not merely receptors of light, but are active participants with light in transforming the darkness of materiality into intelligible perception. Thus, we can see the mythical affinity between the solar principle, animalistic sentience, and the transcendental character of the human self as a form or ideal. Here we also see the way in which the mythical mode of human self-understanding came to conceptualize the human essence as aligned with the celestial world, rather than as something inextricably bound to immanent nature and the Great Mother. What we ultimately find is a crucial enactment of a broader pattern which we find in the mythical epoch as a whole, and which is in fact an overarching motif of this entire evolutionary process. The gradual fissioning apart of transcendence and immanence, and correlatively, the gradual awakening of human individuality and subjectivity.
Yeah, but within the magical structure, so that would correspond within Steiner's narrative to what he calls the Atlantean epoch, I believe. But in any case,
we are now living in the fifth period after the great Atlantean catastrophe. This fifth period was preceded by the fourth or Greco-Latin period. This in turn was preceded by the third or Egyptian, Chaldean, Babylonian, Assyrian period, and this by the ancient Persian, which followed the ancient Indian. We shall call before our mind's eye, as distinctly as possible, the nature of our souls in the age, let us say, after the Atlantean catastrophe, during the first Indian civilization. If we consider our souls as they were at that time, we must first say that the kind of knowledge human beings have today was as yet utterly impossible. Human beings were not yet endowed with such an intimate inner life as they now have. They possessed instead entirely different faculties. For example, what we have often called an ancient shadowy clairvoyance. When we consider the human soul as it was during the daytime in that period, we find that it did not actually feel itself to be an I. Instead, man felt himself to be a member of his tribe, of his people. Just as the hand is a member of the body, so the separate I represented, as a member, the whole community formed by the tribe, the people. Man did not yet perceive himself as an individual I, as he does today. It was the tribal I, the folk I, on which he fixed his attention. One thus lived during the day, not knowing clearly that one was a human being. When evening came, however, and one passed into sleep, consciousness did not become totally darkened as it does today. But instead the soul, during sleep, was able to perceive spiritual facts. One thus perceived in one's environment, for example, facts of which the modern dream is only a shadow.
What that means, it wouldn't mean that we were plant-like at that stage. It means that our ego is being identified as the etheric body. Okay, so it's like when you conceptualize yourself, what are you? What do you think you are? Within the magical structure, what you think you are is your life forces, basically.
And in Greek, there are several words for life that we interpret as life. There is Zoe, and that's the one that Jesus uses when he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Right? We can only really tell the context if we look at other Greek words for life, and one of them is bios, where we get our word biology from. And bios tells you how things live. The other word is psyche, or we would say psyche. Science is really good at bios, contemporary science. They do bios very well. Contemporary science is not as good at psyche as it is at bios. But we certainly know that, people talk about the mind-body connection and how the state of your soul can influence the way you feel, and depression can lead to illness, could lead to cancer, right? We know that, but we don't know. Well, what contemporary science never talks about is Zoe, which is why are things alive at all? What makes things alive? And that's an important notion. And you would think that would be like the primary thing. It's like, it's the first principle, but it's ignored, entirely ignored. And this connects to the idea of the ether, right? And that was what the ancients, or even the medievals, or the early moderns, they connected that to the life force, the anima mundi, the soul of the world. And very often their language, especially when they talk about the soul of the world, takes on feminine coloring. And, you know, as my own work in sophiology, right? That's basically what sophiology is, or who Sophia is that being or principle, which is the metaxu, the between the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And I would not even call that, and this is kind of a Rosicrucian idea, I would not even call spirit and matter binary opposites. I would call them opposite poles of the same principle.
Within the magical structure, what you think you are is your life forces, basically, that which don't have these strict boundaries between the personal and the interpersonal, the way that these later structures of the ego will have. And so this is why you have this very tribalistic kind of consciousness within the magical.
It is within the magical awareness that we first see a sense of division between human self-identity and the world, but in many ways this magical mode of self-identity remains embryonic. The magical soul is not yet an individualized sense of self-identity, but rather manifests as a kind of tribal soul or collective ego. This division would also remain incomplete insofar as there was not yet any sense of division between a distinctly human world and a natural, non-human world which lay beyond our dominion. Within the magical epoch, we had yet to erect settlement walls or reshape the earth into agricultural or pastoral domains which had been fashioned so as to divide a world of imposed order from one of naturalistic primality. Although the human soul had begun to awaken, it nonetheless continued to experience itself as within the womb of the archaic goddess. Likewise, there is yet little distinction between word and concept, and words themselves are understood to actually be spiritual powers in themselves. What humanity was actually like prior to the emergence of mythical awareness from magical awareness is in many ways deeply mysterious, but that will have to be a story for later. It was the birth of our awareness of nature as something other than our own consciousness, and likewise the first intimations of our capacity to wield and master nature through our powers of artifice.
Now, with regards to the telepathy tapes and these nonverbal savants, or nonverbal autists, some of them are savants, but either way, with telepathy and whatnot, I think you've got something like that going on here. I think it can depend on the individual in question, whether we're talking about an ego which is at that magical etheric stage of development, or maybe they have begun to progress into the mythical, but only the lunar valence of that has really begun to develop yet. So this is something I talked about in the video, right? You get this kind of split that happens at that astral mythical stage.
The bifurcation of what I have termed the stellar soul and lunar soul, or what Gebser refers to as the death soul and life soul. As we have seen, the stellar soul is an abstract mode of self-awareness, in which one's selfhood is effectively experienced as an ideal or transcendental form, an individual person. The lunar soul, or life soul, conversely, understands the self in terms of holistic, embodied relationships.
Sophiology, right? That's basically what sophiology is. Or who Sophia is.
Holistic, embodied relationships which are not demarcated or carved into by intellectual abstractions. If that is indeed the case, then Dr. Powell's inference that there is a correlation between parapsychological capabilities and right hemisphere dominance can also be taken to imply that the autistic subjects of her investigations have far more developed lunar souls than stellar souls. Given the aforementioned role of the lunar self as mediator between stellar individuality and the magical structure, we might then infer that the correlation between right hemisphere dominance and telepathy is due to the fact that the right hemisphere exhibits a far more lunar nature and consequently results in a much more direct relationship to the magical structure. Within this bifurcation of the human soul, what we ultimately find is a crucial enactment of a broader pattern which we find in the mythical epoch as a whole, and which is in fact an overarching motif of this entire evolutionary process: the gradual fissioning apart of transcendence and immanence, and correlatively, the gradual awakening of human individuality and subjectivity. This bifurcation of stellar and lunar souls also illustrates for us the fundamental dimensionality of mythical awareness, namely the dimension of polarity. While magical awareness experienced itself as both separate and unified with nature through relations of resonance, mythical awareness instead comes to see itself in a dialectical relationship with the world, and this dialectic nature can be seen reiterated throughout all aspects of mythical consciousness, as all things come to be contrasted and defined in relation to their polar counterparts. One-dimensional monopolarity becomes two-dimensional bipolarity. Celestial and abyssal, order and chaos, universal and particular, transcendent and immanent, yang and yin, freshwater and saltwater, death soul and life soul. In each instance, we find that these complementary pairs simultaneously oppose, necessitate, and complete one another. During the mythical epoch, the gods became more distant over time, and human beings came to rely much more upon prophets, oracles, and written texts. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting topic in itself, incidentally, because I think that and this is going to be something I'm going to be talking about a lot in the second part of this video series, is as the ego kind of moves up, it leaves behind these earlier versions of itself. Like you can think of it as a process of like budding, right? Like the magical ego is here, and then like the mythical like buds off from it, and so it leaves this kind of magical ego behind, but now that's incorporated into the unconscious, into the body. And that becomes the Freudian id. Okay. And then when the same thing happens, the mental breaks off from the mythical and moves up into to become the mental ego. That those two parts of the mythical self, the stellar and the lunar, they become the anima, I believe. This is like in Neon Genesis Evangelion, right? You've got the two, I don't know, fucking anime waifu bitches, right? Like, I shouldn't say that on YouTube. But anyway, the blue one and the red one, you know what I'm talking about. So that's the two different faces of the anima, I believe. There's kind of this lunar aspect, which is kind of like an idealized image of like the mother, which is literally what's going on in Neon Genesis, right? With Rei, she's literally like a clone of Shinji's mom. And then the other one, the solar aspect, is the ego ideal. That's what Freud called it anyway. And so, and then the mental is going to become the super ego, and we haven't moved on from perspectival yet. So I don't know if that will become something different or if we're done, but either way, you get this kind of nested hierarchy of these different structures, which correspond very neatly to this kind of Freudian / Jungian depth psychology.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very excited to watch that next one, because the whole time I'm really trying to map this idea of eurythmy. Okay. This is very, yes.
Zoom's screen sharing thing is so strange to me. Like the controls popping up as an overlay, and it's like halfway over. But yeah, you can see here you've got basically 9 layers altogether.
Yeah.
Arguably 7. You could say that it's really 7 because the human ego doesn't really come into existence until that second stage right there with the magical, and then by the time it gets to the 9th at the very top, it really transcends itself and becomes something different. So you could say it's 7, you could say it's 9. Either way, you end up with either 7-stage processes independently of one another, or 9-stage processes that are like linked at the ends. Either way, whichever number you think is more like sacred or whatever. But yeah, this I think is pretty much the idea of what's going on here. And I'm going to be redoing this diagram for the next video as well, because it wasn't until after I made this that I realized that the double triangle thing, it's actually a horn torus. It's like, and so I'm going to try and redo it as
Cool, yeah.
that, because it would look super cool if I had it layered, right? Where, like, you know how you can have a torus and you can have them nested inside of each other?
Yeah.
Like each structure is a smaller torus, and until you get to the perspectival in the middle, like that would look super cool. I don't know if my graphic design skills are up to that task, but I'm
I
gonna
believe
try,
in
by
you.
golly.
I believe in you. I think.
So anyway, yeah, so we are, as I see it, we are right there in the middle, maybe moving up into the first stage of that upside down triangle that's on the top, but we are definitely still in the process of working out what's going on in that absolute middle part right there, the perspectival ousia. So yeah, that's where we're at.
I see. Okay, I think I might need more time to just like ponder all this, because it's a lot to think about. I'm just really, what I'm most curious about is like the um kind of the noetic faculties which we are developing, like in terms of etheric slash noetic insight, because I see that as really fitting well with eurythmy, which is, I always struggle to describe it, but it's it's almost like what you're saying about the composite. It's the ability to put together um our, and it also kind of fits just in terms of phrasing where it says thought aura. It's like the ability to put the noetic aspect of thought into our language, and it's also spoken language, like the soul of the words, like and I don't know how it all fits together, but I don't know, if you would maybe do some thinking about eurythmy, I would definitely, I don't know, I guess I would appreciate that, or like
Well,
or
I mean,
I would be curious to hear your
we've
thoughts.
mentioned eurythmy like multiple times in these conversations. Let's just do a whole episode just on that. I mean, we
Sure.
might, like, it keeps on coming up. That'd be great, right?
Okay, yeah. Sure, yeah, I would totally be down for that. As Steiner connected with the etheric, as I can tell, except it also seems like something big in general, like in terms of as I was saying earlier, it kind of seems that it might fit with this idea of the spiritualization of the physical and the body. It's because I'm really, particularly in connection with all the stuff about um, reincorporating the abyssal primordial darkness, the deep, the particular of the human body. You know, like part of me thinks that maybe we're called to be angels and to either not have, or like to completely, totally differently relate to the physical body, but another part of me really sees this spiritualization of the body, which would have something to do with eurythmy, in my opinion.
Well, I mean,
Something like
that
that.
raises another question, which I don't think we're going to have.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to address it this time, but we can come back to that. Do angels not have bodies, or do they just have subtle bodies?
Yeah, that's what I would think. I would imagine they would have more so subtle bodies. Like for example, the resurrected body of Christ, I tend to think that it's more of like an etheric body or something, insofar as he is one with the earth now. And like and that we participate in the body of Christ. And I think that maybe it's like something about that which I don't totally understand insofar as, Steiner and Tomberg talked about the reappearance of Christ in the etheric and how that might relate to eurythmy and stuff. So yeah, let's do that. There's so many big ideas that I get a little overwhelmed. It's hard to keep track of all this. But yeah, let's do it another time. Maybe it's just as a definitely not simpler, but I don't know, a less confusing, perhaps thought to wrap it up. Maybe you're still sharing screen here. Just heads up.
Well,
All good. The last thing that I have written down here is the I Ching. I was curious to hear your thoughts on the I Ching, and kind of definitely a hard topic change, but
oh yeah, geez, yeah, we're gonna have to definitely come back to that. I mean,
okay, because it totally fits with the astrochromogram, in my opinion.
That's what I was gonna say. There's definitely some interesting little parallels there, and especially the way that the I Ching, you get this kind of like different combinations of broken and unbroken lines. Reminds me so much of like the way that Goethe's conceptualizing.
I heard it reminds you of the interplay of light and dark as to create color. It was very choppy, but I heard that, and yeah, that definitely, seems like it would fit. Totally, I love it. And especially when we kind of think about the primordial darkness, the yin as like the corporeal, and then the yang as noetic, and the various interplays of heaven and earth creating the manifold experiences of reality. So yeah, this is great. Thank you for
Look, if I could go through the I Ching and take all of those hexagrams and assign like different colors to them, oh yeah, you believe me, that's going to be in a video at some point.
I
But
would definitely buy that chart and put it on my wall. Yeah. And also, I think it connects insofar as the in Eastern in Taoist translations of the Bible, like the Chinese translations, they translate logos as Tao. So you have, it's like maybe we can communicate with the logos of reality through the I Ching, and like, Christianizing, bringing these West and East together. I love it. So
hey, Edgar Casey said that the next place where the next cradle of Christianity would be China, interestingly. So
yeah. Cool, man. This has been great. Lots of big stuff. We should, yeah, and yeah, we'll hopefully return to some of these ideas further so we can nail down maybe eurythmy and the body, and we don't want to nail down the body. That's a little bit.
Well, it depends on which body. Jesus had it coming, but anyway.
Okay.
All right, yeah, let's
man.
get off here.
Well, thanks for watching, everybody.